The bullet whizzed past Winnie Evans's ear as she ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The year was 1878, and the Montana Territory had proven far more merciless than the Boston finishing school she'd fled 3 months prior. Another shot splintered the wood near her head, sending fragments flying into her auburn hair. She didn't flinch, she didn't scream. Most surprising of all, she didn't cry. "Miss Evans!" A deep voice called from somewhere to her right. "Stay down!" Winnie peered through the dust to see a tall figure diving between barrels, six-shooter drawn. His movements were fluid, practiced clearly no stranger to gunfights. His hat had fallen off in the commotion, revealing sandy blonde hair that caught the afternoon sun. She recognized him immediately as Yates Calloway, the newest ranch hand at her uncle's property. The quiet one who rarely spoke at supper, but watched everything with those intense blue eyes. 3 more shots rang out from the saloon across the street. The bank robbery had gone sideways the moment Winnie stepped inside to deposit her uncle's cattle earnings. Now the entire main street of Riverstone was caught in the crossfire. "On my count," Yates called to her, reloading his revolver with remarkable speed. "You're going to run straight for the sheriff's office. Don't stop, don't look back." Winnie clutched the leather satchel of money tighter to her chest. "I can handle myself, Mr. Calloway." A bullet struck the dirt inches from her boot. Yates fired back twice, and a pained yell suggested he'd found his mark. 1, 2, he counted, eyes locked with hers. Before he reached 3, Winnie bolted, her skirts hitched above her ankles as she raced across the dusty street. Gunfire erupted behind her as Yates provided cover. She didn't look back, not even when she heard the sickening thud of a body hitting the ground. The sheriff's office door loomed ahead, and she threw herself against it, tumbling inside. Sheriff Matthews helped her to her feet. "Miss Evans, are you hurt?" "The robbers," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "Mr. Calloway." The door burst open again, and Yates staggered in, blood staining his left sleeve. "Got one of them," he said grimly. The others fled on horseback, heading north. Relief flooded through Winnie, followed quickly by concern as she noticed his injury. "You're wounded." Yates barely acknowledged the blood seeping through his shirt. "Just a graze, nothing worth fussing over." His eyes found hers, searching. "You did well out there, Miss Evans." 3 men dead in my town," Sheriff Matthews growled, grabbing his hat and gun belt. "I'm forming a posse. You in, Calloway?" Yates nodded, never taking his eyes off Winnie. "I'll ride." "I'm going too," she declared. Both men turned to stare at her as if she'd suggested they all strip naked and dance in the town square. "Absolutely not," Yates said firmly. Sheriff Matthews chuckled. "Miss Evans, this ain't no place for a woman," Winnie finished, drawing herself up to her full height, which still left her nearly a foot shorter than Yates. "Those men nearly killed me today, Sheriff. They shot up your town and stole money that would have fed half the cattle in the county through winter." "My uncle's cattle." "Your uncle would skin me alive if I let you ride with a posse," Yates countered. "My uncle isn't here," she replied coolly, "and I'm an excellent shot, better than most of your deputies, I'd wager." The sheriff looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the brewing confrontation. "I've got men to gather. Settle this between yourselves, but we ride in 20 minutes with or without either of you." He tipped his hat and hurried out. Alone in the office, Winnie moved toward Yates, reaching for his injured arm. "At least let me bandage that before you bleed all over your saddle." He stiffened, but allowed her to examine the wound. Her fingers were gentle against his torn skin, and she worked with practiced efficiency, tearing strips from her petticoat to create a makeshift bandage. "Where does a Boston debutante learn to dress wounds?" he asked, wincing slightly as she tightened the cloth. "I was raised on my father's ship until I was 14, she replied, securing the bandage. "Sailors are forever cutting themselves on rope and rigging. I learned quickly or watched men suffer needlessly." "And the shooting?" A small smile played at her lips. "My father believed a woman should protect herself, especially one who spent her childhood in ports all over the world." Yates studied her with newfound curiosity. "You're not what you appear to be, Miss Evans." "Neither are you, Mr. Calloway. Ranch hands don't typically shoot like trained gunmen." A shadow passed over his face. "Perhaps we both have stories we'd rather not tell." He adjusted the bandage and rolled down his sleeve. "You still can't come with us." Winnie's jaw set stubbornly. "Those men have my uncle's money. I failed to protect it. You nearly got yourself killed. Yet here I stand," she replied evenly, "unharmed. Through sheer luck. Through competence and your timely assistance," she corrected, "which I appreciate, but doesn't change my decision." Yates ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Your uncle hired me to work his cattle, not to watch his niece get shot by outlaws." "Then don't watch," Winnie suggested, checking the small derringer hidden in her boot. "Focus on the outlaws instead." Outside, men were gathering, checking weapons and saddling horses. Time was running short. Yates leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "These aren't ordinary thieves, Miss Evans. I recognized one of them. They're part of the Blackwell gang." Winnie felt a chill run through her. Even in Boston, tales of the notorious Blackwell gang had circulated, ruthless outlaws who left no witnesses and showed no mercy. "All the more reason they need to be stopped," she said, hiding her fear beneath determination. "They've killed dozens of men, hardened men, experienced with guns. And now they have my uncle's money, money that represents months of backbreaking work by good men." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "I'm going, Mr. Calloway. Either alongside you or behind you, but I am going." For a long moment they stared at each other in silent battle of wills. Finally, Yates exhaled sharply. "You'll follow my instructions without question," he said. "You'll stay behind me at all times, and if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments." Winnie nodded, relief and triumph mingling in her chest. "Agreed." "I must be losing my mind," he muttered, checking his revolver one final time. "Your uncle will have me strung up for this." "Only if we fail to return with his money," Winnie pointed out pragmatically, heading for the door. "So let's not fail." Outside, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they mounted their horses. Winnie had changed into riding clothes, kept at the general store, an arrangement she'd made with the shopkeeper's wife for occasions when propriety could be sacrificed for practicality. The men of the posse eyed her with mixtures of disapproval, amusement, and grudging respect. But none dared challenge her presence with Yates scowling protectively at her side. As they rode out of town, following the clear tracks left by the fleeing robbers, Winnie felt a strange calm settle over her. She'd spent too many years confined by other people's expectations, her mother's society ambitions, her finishing school's rigid rules. Out here in the Montana Territory, with dust in her hair and danger ahead, she felt more herself than she had in years. She glanced at Yates riding beside her, his profile sharp against the vast landscape. He sensed her gaze and turned slightly. "Having second thoughts, Miss Evans?" Winnie straightened in her saddle. "Not a single one, Mr. Calloway." He studied her for a moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "Good. Because we've got a long ride ahead, and I suspect there's no turning back for either of us now." How right he was, though neither could have guessed just how far this pursuit would take them, or how irrevocably it would change their lives. The posse followed the outlaws' trail as the afternoon stretched into evening. Dust clouds marked their passage across the open plains, heading toward the foothills where ponderosa pines provided ample cover. Sheriff Matthews led the group with the confidence of a man who knew the territory intimately, occasionally stopping to check tracks or confer with his deputy about the direction. Winnie rode silently, ignoring the occasional glances from the other men. Her thoughts kept returning to the robbery, replaying the events in her mind. There had been something strange about it, something calculated in the way the men had entered the bank just as she arrived with the deposit. Almost as if they'd known exactly when she would be there. "You're frowning," Yates observed quietly, guiding his horse closer to hers. "Something doesn't make sense," she replied, keeping her voice low. "How did they know about the money? Uncle Harold is always careful about when he makes deposits." Yates's expression darkened. "You think someone tipped them off?" "The timing was too convenient, and they went straight for me, not the teller's drawers." He considered this, then nodded slowly. We should keep this between us for now. If there is a traitor among your uncle's men, or in the town, Winnie added, then we don't know who to trust. He glanced ahead at the posse members. Stay close to me. The sun was setting when Sheriff Matthews raised his hand, signaling the group to halt. They had reached the edge of a dense forest, the tracks leading straight into the shadowy trees. We'll lose the light soon, the sheriff announced. We'll make camp here and continue at first light. A murmur of agreement passed through the men. Winnie dismounted, stretching her legs discreetly. Though she was an accomplished rider, the hours in the saddle had left her muscles aching. She busied herself with tending to her horse, aware of Yates watching her from several paces away as he unsaddled his own mount. As the men established a small camp, Sheriff Matthews approached Winnie. Miss Evans, I must insist you remain near the center of camp tonight. These woods can be dangerous, even without considering our quarry. I'm not afraid of the dark, Sheriff, she replied with a small smile. No. But mountain lions might take an interest in a solitary figure, he countered, and the Blackwell gang has been known to double back on pursuers. Winnie nodded, conceding the point. I'll stay close. As night fell fully, the men gathered around a small fire, speaking in low voices about the day's events and sharing speculation about where the gang might be headed. Winnie sat slightly apart, wrapping her jacket tighter against the evening chill. Montana nights grew cold, even in summer, and the elevation only increased the bite in the air. Here, Yates appeared beside her, offering a tin cup of hot coffee. It's bitter, but it'll warm you, she accepted gratefully. Thank you. He settled beside her, his own cup in hand. For several minutes they sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance. How long have you worked for my uncle? Winnie finally asked. 3 months, Yates replied. Arrived just after the spring roundup. Around the same time I came to stay with Uncle Harold. He nodded. I heard he had a niece visiting from the east. The men talked about it for weeks before you arrived. A hint of amusement colored his voice. They were disappointed when you didn't show up in hoop skirts and parasols, fainting at the sight of cattle. Winnie laughed softly. I may have been raised partly in Boston, but I've never fainted in my life. I believe it. He took a sip of coffee. Though I admit I was surprised to see Harold Evans's niece pulling her weight at the ranch. Most Eastern ladies would consider it beneath them. Most Eastern ladies haven't spent half their childhood on merchant ships, she countered. Hard work doesn't frighten me. So I've noticed. His voice had softened slightly. In the firelight, his features seemed less severe, revealing a handsome face beneath the trail dust and day-old stubble. May I ask why you came west? It's not the usual direction for a woman of your background. Winnie stared into the flames, considering how much to reveal. My mother passed away last year. After the mourning period, there was pressure for me to make a suitable match. Boston has no shortage of wealthy men seeking wives with the right connections. And you didn't fancy becoming some businessman's trophy? She shook her head. I didn't fancy being anyone's possession. My father died at sea when I was 15, and my mother spent the next 5 years molding me into something marketable. The perfect society wife. Bitterness crept into her voice. When she died, I realized I had no idea who I was beneath all her careful training. Yates was watching her intently now. So, you came to find yourself. I came to remember myself, she corrected. The girl who climbed rigging and learned to navigate by stars, who knew the feel of salt spray and wasn't afraid of dirt under her nails. She glanced at him. Uncle Harold was my father's brother. He's nothing like the Evans side of the family in Boston. He offered me sanctuary when I wrote to him. That explains a few things, Yates murmured. Your turn, Winnie said, turning the conversation. Where did a ranch hand learn to shoot like you did today? A guarded look returned to his eyes. That's a longer story than we have time for tonight. We have nowhere to be until dawn, she pointed out. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I was a lawman once, marshal service. Winnie wasn't entirely surprised. What happened? I made mistakes. The finality in his tone suggested this line of questioning had reached its limit. Mistakes that cost lives. I left that life behind. Yet you still carry a gun like a man who knows how to use it. Some habits are hard to break. He set down his empty cup. And some skills are useful, even for a ranch hand. Across the camp, the sheriff was organizing the watch rotation for the night. Yates rose to his feet. Get some rest, Miss Evans. Tomorrow will be another long day. As he walked away to take his assigned watch, Winnie couldn't help but feel she'd glimpsed something significant beneath his carefully constructed facade. Whatever mistakes had driven Yates Calloway from his past life, they had left deep scars he kept well hidden beneath his quiet competence. She settled onto her bedroll, using her saddle as a pillow. Above her, stars spangled the vast Montana sky, more brilliant than any she'd seen in Boston. Tomorrow, they would continue their pursuit, deeper into territory she didn't know, after dangerous men who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. She should have been afraid, yet, somehow, with Yates nearby, she felt strangely secure. Sleep claimed her eventually, but her dreams were troubled, filled with gunshots, blood-stained money, and shadowy figures whose faces she couldn't quite see. Dawn broke with streaks of pink and gold across the eastern sky. The posse was already breaking camp when Winnie awoke, men speaking in hushed tones as they saddled horses and checked weapons. She quickly rolled her bedding and prepared her own mount, declining offers of assistance with a polite but firm smile. Yates appeared at her side as she tightened her saddle cinch. The tracks lead deeper into the forest, he said quietly. Matthews believes they're heading for Canyon Creek. The old mining settlement. Winnie had heard her uncle mention it, a once booming silver town, now largely abandoned after the vein ran dry. He nodded. It's been a haven for outlaws the last few years. Isolated, defensible, with plenty of abandoned buildings to hide in. And a day's hard ride from here, she noted, understanding the implication. We'll be at a disadvantage arriving tired and in the open. Precisely why I want you to reconsider your position in this posse, Yates said, his voice dropping further. If it comes to a fight in Canyon Creek, it'll be ugly. Winnie checked her derringer, then the larger revolver tucked into her saddlebag. My position hasn't changed, Mr. Calloway. Before he could argue further, Sheriff Matthews called the group to order. We've got clear tracks heading northwest. They're moving fast but not covering their trail. Either they don't expect pursuit or they're leading us into a trap, Yates finished, his expression grim. The sheriff nodded. My thoughts exactly. We'll proceed with caution. Calloway, you've got the most experience with ambush tactics. Ride point with me. Yates hesitated, glancing at Winnie. I'll be fine, she assured him. Go. The posse set out in formation, following the tracks deeper into the forest. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they progressed rocky slopes, giving way to narrow ravines, dense undergrowth slowing their pace. By midday, they'd covered less ground than hoped, and tensions were running high. During a brief stop to rest the horses, Winnie approached the sheriff, who was consulting a weathered map. May I? She asked, gesturing to the map. Matthews looked surprised but handed it over. Winnie studied it carefully, her fingers tracing the topographical lines. My father taught me to read charts, she explained. If they're heading to Canyon Creek, there's a faster route than the one they've taken. She pointed to a narrow pass. This cuts through the ridge. We could get ahead of them. The sheriff raised his eyebrows. That pass is treacherous, barely wide enough for a horse in some places. But it would save hours, she persisted, and potentially allow us to set up our own ambush rather than walking into theirs. Yates had joined them, listening silently. She's right, he said finally. I know that pass. It's risky, but if we move carefully, we can make it through. Matthews looked between them, then back at the map. It's a gamble. So is following their trail directly into whatever they've planned for us, Yates countered. After a moment's consideration, the sheriff nodded. We'll take the pass, but at the first sign of trouble, we backtrack. I'm not losing men to a shortcut. The decision made, they altered course, heading for the mountain pass Winnie had identified. The terrain became steeper, the forest giving way to rocky slopes and narrow ledges. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner and cooler, clouds gathering ominously overhead. "Storm coming," one of the deputies observed nervously. "All the more reason to get through the pass quickly," Matthews replied. "Single file from here on. Calloway, take lead. Evans, stay in the middle of the line." Winnie nodded, falling into position as the trail narrowed. The path hugged the mountainside, dropping sharply on one side into a rocky ravine hundreds of feet below. She kept her focus straight ahead, trusting her horse to follow Yates's mount carefully. They had been traversing the pass for nearly an hour when the first raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, a steady downpour had reduced visibility and made the narrow trail treacherously slick. The horses grew nervous, sensing the danger as thunder rumbled overhead. "We need to find shelter," Matthews called from behind Winnie. "This pass is too exposed during a storm." Yates pointed ahead. "There's a wider section with an overhang about a quarter-mile ahead. We can wait it out there." They pressed on, the rain now coming down in sheets, soaking through their clothes and making each step perilous. Winnie's horse slipped slightly on a loose stone, causing her heart to lurch into her throat as pebbles cascaded down the cliff face beside them. She steadied the animal with firm hands on the reins, ignoring the rain stinging her eyes. A brilliant flash of lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The horses panicked, several rearing in terror. Winnie struggled to control her mount as it danced nervously on the narrow ledge. "Easy, girl," she murmured, stroking its neck. "Easy now." Ahead, Yates had dismounted and was leading his horse on foot. "Everyone down!" he shouted above the storm. "Lead your horses! The ledge is too unstable!" Winnie swung down from her saddle, boots sliding slightly in the mud. She gripped the reins tightly, speaking soothingly to her frightened horse as they inched forward. Another lightning strike illuminated the mountains, closer this time. The rain was falling so heavily now that she could barely see Yates a few yards ahead. A shout from behind made her turn in time to see one of the deputies lose his footing. His horse scrambled for purchase on the slippery rock, but momentum was against them. With a terrified whinny, the animal slid over the edge, taking its rider with it. Their screams were lost in the next crash of thunder. "Keep moving," Matthews ordered, his voice tight with shock. "We can't help him now." The remaining members of the posse continued their grueling progress along the ledge, each step a battle against the elements. When they finally reached the wider section with the stone overhang, they were one man fewer and thoroughly shaken. Huddled beneath the natural shelter, they watched in silence as the storm raged. Winnie shivered, her wet clothes providing little protection against the mountain chill. Without a word, Yates removed his duster somewhat drier, thanks to its oilskin treatment, and draped it around her shoulders. "You'll freeze," she protested. "I've endured worse," he replied simply, turning to help secure the horses. The deputy's death cast a pall over the group. He had been young, barely 20, and eager to prove himself. Now, his body lay broken somewhere in the ravine below, likely never to be recovered. The reality of their situation had become starkly clear. This pursuit could cost any of them their lives. As the afternoon wore on, the storm gradually subsided, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening with raindrops. The posse prepared to move out again, the mood somber and determined. "We should reach Canyon Creek by nightfall if we push hard," Matthews informed them. "If the Blackwell gang followed the main trail, they'll be there already." "Which means they'll be rested and waiting," Yates pointed out. "We need a strategy beyond simply riding in." The sheriff nodded grimly. "I'm open to suggestions." Winnie, who had been studying the map again, spoke up. "There's an old mining access road that circles behind the town. If we split up, a smaller group could approach from that direction, while the main force comes in from the front." The men exchanged glances, clearly reluctant to take tactical advice from a woman. Yates, however, was already examining the route she indicated. "It would give us a tactical advantage," he admitted. "Catch them in a crossfire if they try to flee." Matthews scratched his beard thoughtfully. Who would take the back route? I will, Yates volunteered, and Miss Evans should come with me. Winnie tried not to look too pleased at his inclusion of her. Two isn't enough if you encounter resistance, Matthews argued. Then give us Davis and Wilson, Yates suggested, gesturing to the two most experienced men in the posse. 4's enough for a flanking maneuver, but small enough to move quietly. After some discussion, the plan was agreed upon. They would approach Canyon Creek from two directions, with the main force creating a distraction, while Yates's smaller group positioned themselves to cut off escape routes and provide supporting fire if needed. As they prepared to separate, Matthews pulled Yates aside for a private word. Though Winnie couldn't hear their conversation, the grave expressions on both men's faces told her enough this confrontation would likely end with blood spilled. She only hoped it wouldn't be theirs. The journey resumed, the posse splitting at a fork in the trail. Winnie found herself riding beside Yates, with Davis and Wilson following close behind. They took the less traveled path, climbing through pine forests that gradually thinned as they circled wide around their destination. Have you been to Canyon Creek before? Winnie asked Yates as they rode, hoping conversation might ease the tension that had settled over them. Once, he replied. Years ago when it was still a working mine. It's changed since then, not for the better. What should we expect? He considered the question carefully. One main street with buildings on either side. Most are abandoned now, but the saloon probably still operates. A few cabins scattered on the outskirts. The mine entrance is on the north edge of town, with processing buildings nearby. Good places for ambush, she noted. Exactly while we're coming in from behind. He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. You've handled yourself well so far, Miss Evans. But what we're riding into, it's going to be dangerous. I understand. Do you? His voice had an edge now. These men won't hesitate to kill a woman. They won't see you as a lady to be protected. To them, you're just another gun pointed their way. Winnie met his gaze steadily. I stopped expecting special treatment because of my sex a long time ago, Mr. Calloway. I know the risks. He studied her for a long moment before nodding. Just stay close to me when we get there. I intend to, she replied quietly. The sun was beginning to set when they reached the ridge overlooking Canyon Creek. They dismounted and approached the edge carefully, using a spyglass to survey the settlement below. Canyon Creek had indeed seen better days. What had once been a bustling mining town was now a collection of weathered buildings, many with broken windows or collapsed roofs. The main street ran through the center, ending at the boarded-up assay office. A single lamp glowed in the saloon, and smoke rose from chimneys of a few scattered structures. There, Davis whispered, pointing, 4 horses outside the saloon. Yates adjusted the spyglass, and 2 more behind that large cabin to the east. That's them. Matthews and the others should be in position on the main road soon, Wilson said, checking his pocket watch. We should move now to get into place. They left their horses secured in a grove of pines and began making their way down the slope on foot, using the gathering darkness for cover. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would position themselves behind the buildings where they could prevent escape, while Matthews confronted the gang directly. As they reached the edge of town, Yates signaled for them to separate. Davis and Wilson would cover the eastern exit, while he and Winnie took position behind the saloon where most of the gang appeared to be gathered. Moving silently between abandoned buildings, Winnie kept close to Yates, her revolver drawn. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her hands remained steady. Years of her father's training echoed in her mind. Breathe slowly, move deliberately. Keep your wits when others lose theirs. They reached the back of the saloon just as shots rang out from the main street Matthews, making his presence known. Shouts erupted inside the building, followed by the sound of chairs scraping and boots on wooden floors. Get ready, Yates whispered, positioning himself beside the back door. When they come through, identify yourself as lawmen and order them to surrender. Fire only if they resist. Winnie nodded, taking cover behind a water barrel, her gun trained on the door. Inside, the commotion grew louder. punctuated by more gunshots from the street. The back door flew open and two men burst out, rifles in hand. "U.S. Marshal!" Yates shouted, his revolver aimed steadily. "Drop your weapons!" The men froze momentarily, then one swung his rifle toward them. Yates fired first, the shot catching the man in the shoulder. He dropped with a cry of pain, his weapon clattering to the ground. The second man dove for cover, returning fire wildly. Winnie ducked as splinters flew from the barrel beside her head. She shifted position and fired twice, forcing the outlaw to retreat further behind a stack of crates. More gunfire echoed from the main street, suggesting the confrontation there was equally heated. "Cover me," Yates instructed, moving toward the wounded man. As he advanced, the second outlaw rose from behind the crates, taking aim at Yates's exposed back. Without hesitation, Winnie fired again. Her bullet struck true, and the man collapsed, his unfired shot going harmlessly into the air. Yates secured the wounded outlaw, binding his hands behind his back. "Good shooting," he told Winnie, with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Before she could respond, the main door of the saloon burst open, and three more men spilled into the street, exchanging fire with Matthews and his deputies. From their position, Winnie and Yates had a clear view of the chaotic scene. Two of the gang members fell quickly under the posse's coordinated fire. The third, a tall man with a distinctive red bandana, made a break for the stables. "That's Reginald Morgan," Yates said urgently. "He's Blackwell's second in command. He'll have the money." Without waiting for a response, Yates took off after him, with Winnie close behind. They rounded the corner of the saloon just as Morgan reached the stables. The outlaw turned, saw them in pursuit, and fired wildly in their direction. Yates shoved Winnie behind the cover of a water trough as bullets thudded into the wood. "Stay here," he ordered, then darted toward a nearby wagon, returning fire as he moved. Morgan disappeared into the stables. Moments later, the sound of a horse's hooves pounding against dirt signaled his attempt to escape. Ignoring Yates's instruction, Winnie ran toward the back of the stables, reasoning that Morgan would exit through the rear doors to avoid the main street where the rest of the posse waited. She was right. As she reached the corner of the building, Morgan burst through the back doors on horseback, saddlebags bulging with what could only be the stolen money. He spotted her immediately, raising his gun with a snarl of rage. Winnie fired first, her bullet grazing his arm. His shot went wide as his horse reared in panic. Before he could steady his aim for a second attempt, Yates appeared from the side of the building, tackling Morgan from his mount in a desperate flying leap. Both men crashed to the ground, rolling in the dirt as they grappled for control. Morgan was larger, using his weight to pin Yates down, landing several brutal punches. Winnie rushed forward, searching for an opening to help without risking a shot that might hit Yates. Finding an opportunity, she brought the butt of her revolver down hard on the back of Morgan's head. The outlaw grunted in pain but didn't release his grip on Yates's throat. Growing desperate, Winnie kicked at Morgan's side with all her strength, finally causing him to loosen his hold enough for Yates to break free. Yates scrambled to his feet, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. Morgan recovered quickly, drawing a knife from his boot and lunging forward. The two men circled each other warily, Morgan with his knife, Yates empty-handed, his gun lost in the initial tackle. "Get back, Miss Evans," Yates warned, never taking his eyes off Morgan. "The famous Marshal Calloway," Morgan sneered, blood dripping from his split lip. "Thought you were dead after what happened in Dodge City." "Not dead," Yates replied coldly. "Just waiting for scum like you to make a mistake." Morgan laughed, an ugly sound. "Your mistake was coming after the Blackwell gang. The boss has a special reward for anyone who brings him your head." They continued their deadly dance, Morgan making several quick thrusts that Yates narrowly avoided. Winnie raised her revolver, but the men were moving too unpredictably for a safe shot. Morgan feinted left, then slashed right, his blade catching Yates across the ribs. Yates staggered but managed to grab Morgan's wrist, twisting until the knife fell from his grasp. The two men crashed into each other again, trading blows with increasing desperation. In their struggle, they knocked into Winnie, sending her revolver flying from her hand. She scrambled after it as the men continued their brutal fight behind her. When she turned back, Morgan had gained the upper hand, straddling Yates with his hands locked around his throat. Without her gun, and with no time to recover it, Winnie acted on pure instinct. She grabbed the fallen knife and plunged it into Morgan's shoulder. The outlaw howled in pain, releasing Yates to reach for the blade embedded in his flesh. That moment of distraction was all Yates needed to deliver a powerful blow to Morgan's jaw, finally knocking him unconscious. Breathing heavily, Yates pulled himself to his feet and quickly bound Morgan's hands with the man's own belt. Only then did he turn to Winnie, who stood trembling slightly from the aftermath of adrenaline. "Are you hurt?" he asked hoarsely, his voice rough from Morgan's stranglehold. She shook her head, unable to speak as the reality of what had just occurred washed over her. She had stabbed a man. The knowledge left her feeling strangely hollow. Yates seemed to understand what she was experiencing. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You saved my life," he said simply. "Thank you." The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of Sheriff Matthews and the rest of the posse. They surveyed the scene with expressions of amazement, Morgan unconscious and bound, Yates bloodied but standing, and Winnie Evans looking remarkably composed despite the knife blood on her hands. "The rest of the gang?" Yates inquired. "2 dead. 3 captured," Matthews reported. "And we recovered most of the stolen money." He nodded toward Morgan. "With him, that accounts for all 6 who were in the bank." Yates retrieved the saddlebags from Morgan's horse, checking the contents. "It's all here," he confirmed, handing them to Winnie. "Your uncle's money, safe and sound." As the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, Winnie became acutely aware of Yates's injuries. "You need medical attention," she insisted, noting the blood seeping through his shirt where Morgan's knife had caught him. "It's not deep," he assured her, though his pained expression suggested otherwise. Matthews instructed his deputies to secure the prisoners while he examined the captured gang members more closely. "We'll camp here tonight and head back to Riverstone in the morning," he decided. "The wounded need tending, and we could all use some rest." They established their camp in the abandoned schoolhouse, the most intact building in town. As the men secured the prisoners and tended to the horses, Winnie insisted on treating Yates's wounds. He reluctantly allowed her to clean and bandage the knife cut on his ribs and the various other injuries he'd sustained in the fight. "You should have been a doctor," he commented as she worked, her touch efficient but gentle. "I considered it," she admitted, "but medical colleges rarely admit women." "Their loss," he murmured, wincing slightly as she tightened a bandage. When she finished, an awkward silence fell between them. The events of the day had created a bond that neither quite knew how to acknowledge. They had saved each other's lives, fought side by side, and revealed parts of themselves normally kept hidden. "What Morgan said," Winnie began hesitantly, "about Dodge City," Yates's expression closed off immediately. "Ancient history. It doesn't sound that way if the Blackwell gang has a bounty on your head." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I was part of a task force formed to bring down the Blackwell gang 3 years ago. We tracked them to Dodge City, thought we had them cornered." His voice grew distant, haunted. "It was a trap. They knew we were coming. 6 marshals died that day, including my partner. I was the only one who walked away." "It wasn't your fault," Winnie said softly. "I led that operation," he countered. "Those men followed me to their deaths because I was too eager to make the arrest." Bitterness laced his words. "After that, I couldn't wear the badge anymore, couldn't face the families of the men who died." "So you became a ranch hand?" "I became a drifter," he corrected. "Took odd jobs, moved frequently. Your uncle hired me without asking too many questions, which suited me fine." Winnie studied his face in the lamplight, seeing beyond the hardened exterior to the burden of guilt he carried. "Is that why you tried to stop me from coming? Because you couldn't bear the responsibility of another death?" His eyes met hers, startled by her perception. "Partly," he admitted, but mostly because the thought of you being hurt was—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to complete the thought. Before she could press him further, Sheriff Matthews approached. "Calloway, a word?" Yates nodded, rising carefully to avoid aggravating his injuries. He followed the sheriff to the far corner of the room, where they engaged in an intense, whispered conversation. Winnie couldn't hear their words, but the serious expressions on both men's faces suggested it was significant. When Yates returned, his demeanor had changed subtly, a new tension visible in the set of his shoulders. "What is it?" she asked. Matthews questioned the prisoners, he explained quietly. "They've confirmed something I've suspected since the bank robbery. There was indeed an informant who tipped them off about your uncle's money." "Who?" Yates hesitated. "They claim it was your uncle's foreman, Pearson." The revelation hit Winnie like a physical blow. Pearson had been with her uncle for nearly a decade, trusted implicitly with every aspect of the ranch operations. The idea that he would betray that trust was almost inconceivable. "There must be a mistake," she whispered. "I hope so," Yates replied grimly. "But it makes a certain sense. Pearson would know exactly when the cattle money was being deposited. And he's been acting strangely the past few weeks, disappearing for hours without explanation. What will happen now?" Matthews has dispatched one of his deputies to ride ahead to Riverstone with a message for the town marshal. If all goes well, they'll have Pearson in custody by the time we return. He placed a gentle hand on her arm. "I'm sorry, Miss Evans. I know you and your uncle thought highly of him." The betrayal stung, though Winnie had only known Pearson briefly. She could only imagine how her uncle would feel when he learned the truth that a man he'd trusted like family had endangered his niece's life for money. "Get some rest," Yates advised, sensing her distress. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Sleep proved elusive, however. Winnie lay awake, replaying the events of the past 2 days in her mind. The bank robbery, the chase through the mountains, the confrontation in Canyon Creek, all of it seemed surreal now, like something from a dime novel rather than her own life. And then there was Yates Calloway. Not a simple ranch hand, but a former marshal with a tragic past and enemies who still hunted him. A man who had saved her life multiple times and who looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with danger. When dawn finally broke, the posse prepared for the journey home. The prisoners were secured on horses, the wounded tended as best they could be, and Morgan, still sullen and defiant, despite his injuries, was kept under Yates's watchful eye. The return journey was slower than their pursuit had been, constrained by the need to guard the prisoners and accommodate the wounded. They took the main trail rather than risking the treacherous pass again, especially with their increased numbers. As they rode, Winnie found herself repeatedly glancing at Yates, studying the profile that had become strangely dear to her over the past 2 days. He caught her looking once and offered a small, private smile that warmed her more effectively than the morning sun. By late afternoon, they reached familiar territory, the outer boundaries of her uncle's ranch. Winnie felt a complicated mixture of relief and apprehension. The adventure was ending, but the consequences of Pearson's betrayal were yet to be faced. Sheriff Matthews dispatched 2 deputies to escort the prisoners directly to Riverstone, while the rest of the posse continued to the Evans ranch. As they approached the main house, Winnie saw her uncle standing on the porch, his expression a mixture of worry and relief. Harold Evans was a bear of a man, with the same auburn hair as Winnie, though his was streaked with gray. He rushed forward as they dismounted, enveloping his niece in a powerful embrace. When Matthews's deputy brought word of what happened, he said gruffly, "I feared the worst." "I'm fine, Uncle Harold," she assured him, returning his hug, "and we recovered your money." Her uncle held her at arm's length, examining her for injuries. Finding none, he turned to Yates, noting the blood-stained bandages visible beneath his torn shirt. "Calloway," he acknowledged with a nod. "The deputy said you watched over my niece." "She watched over herself admirably, sir," Yates replied. "Your niece is quite capable." Harold smiled proudly. "That she is." His expression darkened. I assume you've heard about Pearson. Yates nodded. Has he been apprehended? Caught him trying to flee yesterday. He's in the town jail now. Harold's voice was tight with controlled anger. 10 years I trusted that man, treated him like family. Winnie placed a comforting hand on her uncle's arm. I'm so sorry, Uncle. Harold sighed heavily. Well, what's done is done. The important thing is you're both safe, and the money's recovered. He gestured toward the house. Come inside. You look like you could use food and rest. The ranch hands had prepared a hearty meal, and the returning posse members ate gratefully. Matthews departed shortly after, needing to return to Riverstone to process the prisoners, but not before pulling Yates aside for another private conversation. When everyone else had retired for the evening, Winnie found Yates alone on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. She joined him at the railing, comfortable in the silence that stretched between them. Will you stay? She finally asked. At the ranch, I mean. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze remaining fixed on the distant mountains. Matthews offered me my badge back, he said eventually. The Marshal Service is rebuilding the task force to go after Blackwell himself. My experience with the gang makes me valuable to them. Winnie felt a pang of disappointment, though she tried not to show it. So you're leaving? I haven't given him my answer yet. Yates turned to face her, his expression conflicted. For 3 years, I've been running from what happened in Dodge City. Maybe it's time I stopped running. Is that what you want? To be a marshal again? He considered the question carefully. Part of me does. I was good at it before. Everything went wrong, and I want to see Blackwell brought to justice. His voice softened. But there are other things I want now, too. The way he looked at her made her breath catch. What things? Instead of answering directly, he asked, Why did you insist on joining the posse, Miss Evans? The truth. Winnie found herself unable to dissemble under his steady gaze. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you riding into danger while I waited safely at home. The admission cost her some pride, but the time for pretense had passed. I've spent my whole life being told where I belong and what I'm allowed to want. Coming west was supposed to free me from those constraints. And has it? Freed you? In some ways, she acknowledged. In others? She trailed off, unsure how to express the new constraint she felt, the growing attachment to a man who might ride away at any moment to resume a dangerous life. Yates took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. What is it you want, Winnie? He asked softly, using her given name for the first time. The question hung between them, laden with possibilities. Winnie thought of Boston, of the life she'd left behind, the suitors chosen for their fortunes rather than their character, the narrow expectations of what a lady could be or do. Then she thought of the past 2 days, the exhilaration of the chase, the satisfaction of recovering the stolen money, and most of all, the partnership she'd formed with the man standing before her. I want to live honestly, she said finally, to be valued for who I am, not who someone else wants me to be. She met his gaze directly. I want to be with someone who sees me, truly sees me, and doesn't try to change me. Yates reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. I see you, Winnie Evans. I've seen you from the moment you arrived at this ranch, refusing help with your bags and asking your uncle about his cattle before you'd even settled in. Her heart thundered in her chest as he continued, his voice low and earnest. I see a woman who's as comfortable with a gun as she is with a book, who risked her life to recover what was stolen and bring criminals to justice, who saved my life without hesitation. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. I see a woman I can't imagine leaving behind, no matter what badge Matthews offers me. Winnie placed her hand over his, holding it against her face. Then don't leave, she whispered. Stay. Help Uncle Harold run the ranch. He needs a new foreman now. And there's no one he trusts more than you. And what would people say about a former marshal working as a ranch foreman? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew her answer. The same thing they said about a Boston society girl riding with a posse, she replied with a small smile. Let them talk. We know who we are. Yates leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. I've spent 3 years punishing myself for what happened in Dodge City. Maybe it's time I allowed myself some happiness. Maybe it is, she agreed softly. When his lips finally met hers, Winnie felt as though everything in her life had been leading to this moment. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as she responded with equal fervor. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while her hands slid up to his shoulders, mindful of his injuries, but unwilling to let go. When they eventually parted, both slightly breathless, Yates kept her in the circle of his arms. I'll stay, he decided. I'll tell Matthews tomorrow that my marshal days are behind me. What about Blackwell? She asked, knowing how important bringing the gang leader to justice was to him. I'll provide information, help the task force any way I can, he said. But from here, my place is on this ranch now. He paused, adding with a hint of mischief, unless, of course, some other crisis requires us to form another posse. Winnie laughed softly. I think I've had enough adventure for a while. As they stood together under the vast Montana sky, Winnie felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever the future held, whether quiet days on the ranch or occasional excitements, she would face it alongside a man who saw her clearly and valued her completely. 3 months later, with autumn painting the hills in shades of gold and crimson, Winnie stood on the same porch, watching Yates direct the ranch hands as they prepared for the fall roundup. As the new foreman, he had transformed the operation, introducing efficient methods that had already increased productivity. Harold was delighted with the changes, frequently declaring that hiring Yates was the best decision he'd ever made. The news from Riverstone had been satisfying as well. Reginald Morgan and the surviving members of his gang had been sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Pearson, after a full confession, was serving 10 years for his role in the robbery. And though Nathan Blackwell himself remained at large, the Marshal Service had made significant progress dismantling his network, using information Yates had provided. Life had settled into a pleasant routine, though routine hardly seemed the right word for days filled with the varied tasks of ranch life and evenings spent in stimulating conversation or comfortable silence. Winnie had discovered a talent for the business side of ranching, helping her uncle maintain the accounts and negotiate cattle sales with a shrewdness that surprised even herself. As for her relationship with Yates, it had deepened in ways that still sometimes took her breath away. They had married in a simple ceremony at the ranch 6 weeks after the Canyon Creek incident, with her uncle giving her away and Sheriff Matthews standing as Yates's best man. The local gossips had been scandalized by the speed of their courtship, but neither Winnie nor Yates had seen any reason to wait once they'd recognized what they'd found in each other. Now she watched as Yates finished giving instructions to the hands and turned toward the house. He spotted her on the porch and smiled that private smile he reserved only for her before making his way over. "Everything ready for tomorrow?" she asked as he climbed the steps. "As ready as it can be," he replied, leaning against the porch railing. "Though Davidson is still struggling with that new roping technique I showed him." Winnie chuckled. "He'll get there. He's eager to learn." Yates nodded, then studied her face more carefully. "You look tired. Are you feeling all right?" "Just a bit worn out," she admitted. "And I have something to tell you." His expression immediately shifted to concern. "What is it?" Winnie took his hand, placing it gently over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly. "Next spring, according to Dr. Reynolds." Yates went completely still, his eyes widening as her words registered. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Then, to her surprise, she saw tears gathering in his eyes. This man who faced danger without flinching, who had endured loss and guilt and emerged stronger, was moved to tears by the news of their child. "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "I never imagined." never dared hope for this kind of life. A tear slipped down his cheek, and Winnie reached up to brush it away. "I've never seen you cry before," she observed gently. Yates smiled through his tears. "There are different kinds of crying, Winnie. These aren't tears of sorrow." She felt her own eyes burning, yet strangely, no tears came. After a lifetime of crying easily at books, at music, at both joy and sorrow, she found herself unable to express her overwhelming happiness through tears. "I can't cry anymore," she said, surprised by the realization. "After everything we've been through, the robbery, the chase, the fight now, when I'm happier than I've ever been, I can't seem to cry." Yates cradled her face in his hands. "Then I'll cry enough for both of us," he promised, not bothering to wipe away the moisture on his cheeks. "For every joy, every sorrow, every precious moment we share, I'll carry those tears for you." In that moment, Winnie understood that some emotions ran too deep for tears, that happiness could be so complete, so all-encompassing, that it transcended ordinary expression. What she felt for Yates, for the life they were building together, for the child growing within her, was beyond weeping. It was a certainty, a foundation as solid as the Montana mountains surrounding them. As the sun set behind those mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold, Winnie and Yates stood together on the porch of what was now truly their home. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and life in the Montana territory would surely bring many, they would face them, as they had faced everything else. Side by side, strength matched with strength, courage with courage, love with love. And if sometimes the weight of joy was too great for her tears to fall, well, she had a husband who would cry enough for both of them.